Back during the fall of 2021, independent toy company Skeletron launched a highly successful Kickstarter campaign, which saw a return of the 1980s Action Force enemy team into a modern toy world. The Kickstarter not only saw a resurgence for some vintage villains, but was largely built around the new Roboskull Mk2 vehicle and had an impressive 13 stretch goals unlocked, with even a bonus mid-campaign 14th stretch goal. We'd see some of these figures built in the traditional O-ring style, as well as more modern 4 and 6-inch figure styles as well. And with some of these items now making it into the hands of collectors, it's time to have a look at what they have to offer. But in this case right here, we'd also like to have a look at how well these new toys integrate with your vintage Action Force enemy team. So it's time to take a closer look. Let's begin. We can start by looking at the 3 3/4 inch O-ring figure that's known as the Wolf Trooper. Cosmetically, the Wolf Trooper can be considered as something of an update to the 1984 figure that came with the vintage version of the Roboskull. Though take note that the Wolf Trooper is a single packed figure, and later in the video we can discuss the various wolf figure options, including the Blood Wolf that exists across Skeletron's new storyline. We'll also have a look at the upgrade kit for this figure, which swaps the character's head sculpt into that of the Skeletron character, which in some ways can be considered as an update for the vintage enemy team mail-away figure of the same name. And yes, Skeletron doubles as both this new company's name as well as a character name in their new toy line. We'll also briefly look at the Assassin Skeledrones, which expand the enemy ranks beyond what came out during its original 1983 and 1984 run by Palitoy, and we'll also have a look at the Gyre Wolf, which is a 4-inch modern constructed figure that pays a heartwarming tribute to a dedicated G.I. Joe collector and fan who has been dearly missed since his passing a number of years ago. Now, I will list some observations of these figures as the video progresses. That being said, I won't consider this a formal or standard review, as I'm not comfortable doing that because of the potential conflict of interest that I would have, particularly when considering my own ties to the Delta 17 toy line, and with Delta 17 being a similar retro style O-ring toy line. What I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description below for the Needless Things channel's review if you'd like to have a look at the O-ring figures in a more usual review type of setting, and this video here will be more of an overview that talks about Skeletron's progress so far, and of course all the ties that harken back to the vintage Palitoy line that these figures are derivative of. I'll also want to mention how the characters fit in with this modern Skeletron toy line canon, and then I'll do some comparisons to see how they serve as updates to the original Palitoy versions, and show you how they all fit together when you incorporate them with the rest of the vintage enemy team's worth of figures. Though speaking of incorporating them with other toy lines, here's a look at the Wolf Trooper on card next to the Strike Force Alpha Dr. Diablo, as well as a Delta 17 Delta Squad Infantry Trooper. The card backs are pretty much the same thickness as that of Delta 17, and the card back does feel a little different from that of Strike Force Alpha, but do note that the Strike Force Alpha ones need to be of a thickness and card texture to be able to slip into their resealable cases. Of course, all this is just to show the O-ring renaissance and retro collector resurgence that we are currently experiencing. You'll notice that the Wolf Trooper is a collaboration figure with Grindstone Toys, who are making the similarly scaled Call Sign Longbow O-ring toy line, so it's always great to see these companies work together. And I'll point out that the gorgeous artwork was done by Doug Hart, who also worked on the original G.I. Joe toy line. Getting the figure open unfortunately means we have to tear through the gorgeous card back, which is a bit sad but also necessary. I did find out afterwards though that there was an easier way to open them by putting your finger in through an opening at the bottom of the card to minimize the damage, but alas, I found out too late. The figure does come with a nice clear stand and a bunch of accessories, some of which are meant for first swap between the Wolf Trooper and the Skeletron character. Taking the figure out, you'll see a lot of detail on it with the Red Shadow skull and crossbone style logo and a color scheme that matches exactly what's expected. There's some great details on the back of the figure as well, and we can look at the articulation, which is similar to that of a vintage G.I. Joe, and also adds a wrist swivel which allows for the figure to pose a little bit better. Overall, the joints and tolerances are pretty good. There's a range of different accessory options, and the backpack storage is a key feature of this. The sword does go in, though be a little careful when putting it in. It does fit, but just don't jam it in too recklessly. The claw goes onto the back, and the smaller pistol tabs onto the back of the figure, and it doesn't get in the way when you put the backpack on, which is great. The backpack peg can be a little bit of a tight fit, but you should be able to get it to work. The helmet fits on nicely and is grooved in a manner to fit snugly, and I've put the rifle into his hands as this is how he was shown in promotional shots that were officially done by Skeletron. Canon-wise, you'll notice that the Wolf Trooper is listed as well a trooper meant for aerial assault and is clearly an army builder. So judging by the file card, not all Wolf Troopers get to pilot the Roboskull, as there are more troopers than there are vehicles, so do keep that in mind as part of Skeletron's storyline canon. In any case, he poses very nicely and I'm liking what I'm seeing. Yes, selective troopers can pilot a Roboskull, but Skeletron has also included a character named Bloodwolf in the 4-inch modern and 6-inch modern construction form, and this character is probably a more direct derivative of the Palitoy Red Wolf. Note that it is the 4-inch version of Bloodwolf that comes packed in with Skeletron's new Roboskull Mk2. They also have a special Weasel pilot, which is their take on Wild Weasel, and that comes packed in with the variant special edition Roboskull Mk2. We'll need to open up the second figure, and this one will be what I fit the Skeletron head onto. We'll skip past the rest of the opening process as you just saw what I did with the other figure, and we'll just get to pulling the figure apart at the torso to make the head swap. And let's see if I can do all of this without disassembling the figure entirely. And it looks like I got lucky here, so let's tighten the figure's torso back up and get him posed and displayed. Getting a close-up of the head sculpt, just look at the eyes and just how the whiteness pops. Looking at the file card and the card back, they've given the Skeletron figure the role of the Red Shadow's commander, which is a deviation from the 1984 Palitoy version, so as mentioned, this new updated toy line has its own unique story. The Skeletron character's origins have been apparently eradicated, and he uses the catchphrase of untamed, untethered, unleashed, Red Shadows arise. I suppose this could be a bit of a catchphrase, much in the way that the old Palitoy Red Shadow said the words, blood for the Baron. I did elect to put the laser sword in his hand as per the promotional photos, and you'll notice that the skull logo on the sword is either upside down or right side up depending on which side of the sword that you're looking at. One neat thing is that the sword literally glows in the dark. So thanks to Ben from Skeletron for pointing this out to me. Looking at the figure side by side with the Wolf Trooper, they are indeed a great homage, a great love letter, and an addition to what we already had during the vintage toy era. And here's a look at the claw accessory in the hand of the Trooper, just for good measure. I suppose now is as good a time as any to revisit some history and have a look at the Action Force enemy team that Palitoy rolled out during the 1980s. In 1983, we were introduced to the enemy leader, Baron Ironblood. Additionally, we got his second in command, who was known as the Black Major. They also had nearly indestructible robots known as the Mouton, which had a very interesting design. There was also the Red Vulture, who was the driver of the Shadow Track vehicle, and there's the Red Laser, who was the Red Shadow scientist that was included with the Laser Exterminator. We had the Red Shadows army builder itself, and it should be noted that the Red Shadows is a name that's been adopted by fans in subsequent decades to denote the entire enemy team led by Baron Ironblood, even though the Red Shadows name initially only applied to the trooper itself. 1984 would add the reptilian sea creature known as the Kraken, and also the Red Jackal, a repaint of G.I. Joe's enemy Destro figure who was packaged in with the Hyena, which itself was a recolor of the Cobra Hiss tank. Red Jackal is notably missing from my collection, so my good friend Shane opted to lend me a photo of his. The Red Shadow also had an escape armor, which was a recolor of G.I. Joe's Cobra Snake armor. And of course we have the figures that are being paid tribute to in this video. A mail-away android known as Skeletron, who at one point during the design process was intended by Palitoy to be the pilot for the Roboskull. And of course, the mind-blowingly gorgeous flying spacecraft, the Roboskull itself, and this was packed in with the Red Wolf, the eventual pilot who was the astronaut for the Red Shadows. Looking at the modern retro-style figures side by side with the original 5 points of articulation figures that they're representative of, it's certainly gratifying to see the Skeletron O-ring figure with its vintage counterpart, as well as the Wolf Trooper that harkens back to the Red Wolf. Do note that for the purpose of this video, I'm electing to compare the Wolf Trooper and not the Blood Wolf to the original Red Wolf simply because the Trooper is what we have in O-ring form at the time of this video. I'll eventually get my hands on a modern constructed Blood Wolf, be it in 4 or 6 inch scale, and I'm aware that the Blood Wolf will have an interesting backstory that will show why he's an important part of this toy line. Let's just say he's an extremely seasoned pilot and is integral to the lore. And before we move on, I did see on Facebook that somebody posted the rifle can fit into the back of the backpack when the sword is removed, so that's a nice added thing to find out. As for the other wolf-themed options in this line, I do have the 4-inch Gyre Wolf, and this one is a collaboration between Skeletron as well as Marauder Task Force and another company named Spartan Toys. As we open the figure up, this time I did figure out that I should use the groove opening at the bottom of the packaging to make it easier to open and preserve the card front. I do want to point out that it is quite an awesome thing for Skeletron to expand the Red Shadow's ranks, beginning with the Gyre Wolf. And that's because, as I started talking about earlier, the figure is a fitting tribute to the late Gary Head, also known as Gary Goggles to his friends before his passing in 2015. The silver and black color scheme does a lot to make the figure stand out. He comes with a small weapon and helmet, a backpack with 2 detachable claws, 2 different swappable heads, and 2 alternate stands. The articulation is similar to that of other figures done by Marauder in the past, so I don't want to get into too much detail on that front here. If you compare it to other Marauder figures, the heads are swappable, which I suppose is expected in this case. The claws can detach and allow you to put them onto his forearms if you want him to go into a melee fighting mode. I did notice that the backpack needs to be pushed in all the way, otherwise for my figure the backpack falls out easily if I don't do that. Looking at the character bio, it lists Gary as an intelligence specialist, someone who pursues hidden data, esoteric histories, and occult artifacts. Sounds like the traits of an avid toy collector who likes to research the past, which of course is something that I can appreciate. The Gyre name is also a tribute to Gary's online forum name, where he went by the handle of Gyre Viper. As for the other accessories, do take note that the translucent blue stand, which I've been led to believe is the Gyre itself, is glow in the dark just like Skeletron's O-ring sword. And the alternate translucent head, which is a nice added accessory, is yet another that's glow in the dark. Looks like Skeletron as a company spared no expense in not just creating a toy line that's a love letter to the Palitoy Red Shadows, but also a love letter to a valued friend from their past. Also, the story of Gary Goggles in toy form didn't start there. In fact, Hasbro officially even made a 4-inch figure based off of Gary that was named Sightline as part of their 50th anniversary toy line. And further to that, a fan-made figure in O-ring form of Sightline was made for JoeCon 2017 and sold at the declassified booth. Needless to say, whether it's under the alias of Sightline or as Gyre Viper, Gary Goggles has a legacy that lives on. Finally, we come to the 3-pack of Assassin Skeledrones, which was the first of the Skeletron products to make it into collector homes, even if I'm just opening it up right now. The file card shows that they serve the purpose of assassination and reconnaissance, and that they deploy as part of the crew aboard the Roboskull Mk2 craft, and that they're often accompanied by wolf troopers. They're a nice addition to the Red Shadow's ranks, be it as part of the line of figures that we're featuring here, or as part of expanding your vintage Palitoy range in your own personal head canon. And because they're also a collaboration with Marauder, the heads are swappable with other Marauder-built products. And as we look at the range of offerings featured in this video, I suppose it's time now to put the 2 O-Ring figures, the 4-inch modern Gyre Wolf, and the 3-pack of Assassin's Skeledrones together, and we can just enjoy the experience in this resurgence of various modern toy lines that are inspired by G.I. Joe and Action Force. We can also additionally still appreciate the vintage range of Palitoy Action Force Red Shadows, and optionally we can look at these new Skeletron figures as reinforcements to augment those existing ranks. That is, of course, assuming that you want to mix old and new together, since it does seem to fit, or you can simply see them as separate brands, leaving Palitoy Vintage as Vintage and Skeletron Modern as Modern. I know I said earlier on that I didn't want to do too formal of a review, and I realized that there were some review style elements in this video that I simply couldn't avoid. For the reasons I stated earlier on though, I won't rate or rank the figures on any sort of measurement or numerical or grading scale, and hopefully I haven't said anything that could spark the impression that I am at any sort of conflict of interest. That's why I opted to discuss the figures as part of their built-in storyline and hopefully educate the audience a little bit, while briefly talking about Skeletron as a company and its collaboration partners, while also adding some of my own interpretations and showing how the figures integrate with the Action Force figures in the vintage range and talking about that particular history. In the end, I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and yes, while Toy Connections has primarily to this point been dedicated to the preservation of vintage action figure history, I suppose that also can be extended to newer toys that have taken the right steps to make their own mark into action figure history. What I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description section below for the Skeletron web store, as well as all their social media portals, so that you can stay up to date on what's going on with them. And if this video was worth your while, you can take your pick of some of the previous toy history videos that I've done on this channel right over here. In past videos, this is where I'd usually say, Yo Joe, but I suppose in this case, it's more appropriate to say, full force and blood for the Baron. See you next time.